The table was perfect. I'd spent hours getting it just right. The linen cloth was crisp and white. The silverware gleamed under the soft light from the centerpiece candle, and the wine glasses were polished to a high shine. It even found the specific Bordeaux he'd raved about on our third date. The whole apartment smelled like rosemary and slow-cooked beef. His favorite I'd worn the black dress. He said made my eyes look like stars. I checked my phone for the 10th time in as many minutes. 7:05 p.m. He was only 5 minutes late. Not a big deal. Traffic could be bad. The next few days were a blur. I cried until my face was raw and swollen. I screamed into a pillow. I threw the anniversary dinner in the trash plate, and all the anger was a fire. But underneath, it was a vast freezing ocean of worthlessness. He'd discarded me so easily. I was nothing, an afterthought, a piece of furniture he'd decided to leave behind. I looked at my life, me comfortable, middling job, my routine, the way I'd always made myself smaller to fit into the space he allowed me, and I hated it. The financial instability hit me like a physical blow. We'd shared everything, the rent, the bills, the groceries, my own job. It was fine, but it wasn't enough to cover our apartment on my own. I had maybe a month too, if I stretched it, before things got really bad. The panic was a constant hum in the background of everything. I did a low-grade static of fear. So I started applying for anything and everything. I refreshed job boards until my eyes hurt. I sent out resumes for positions I was overqualified for, and ones I was wildly underqualified for. It was a numbers game. Just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. One of them was for a senior project manager role at this big, intimidating tech firm. I almost didn't click apply. My experience was in a different sector, smaller companies. I didn't have the right keywords, but desperation makes you bold, or maybe just reckless. I figured the worst they could say was no. A week later, I got a call for an interview. I was so shocked, I almost dropped the phone. I spent the next 2 days trying to cram every piece of industry jargon I could find into my brain. I practiced answers in the mirror. I was a nervous wreck. The day of the interview was a comedy of errors. My alarm didn't go off. I spilled coffee on my only clean blouse and had to frantically dab at it with a wet cloth. I was running so late, I had to sprint for the train, my heels clacking against the pavement, my hair a mess. I arrived at this sleek glass-fronted building with sweat on my brow and a coffee stain on my collar, completely out of breath. The waiting room was all cool grays and minimalist art. Everyone else looked pristine, calm, like they belonged there. I felt like an imposter when they called my name. I stood up too fast, and my portfolio slipped out of my hands, papers scattering all over the floor. I wanted to die. I knelt down, my face burning, scrambling to gather everything. I walked into the interview room flustered and apologetic. There were 3 executives sitting across a long, polished table. They introduced themselves, and their titles were so impressive I immediately forgot them. I tried to launch into my rehearsed answers, but my mind went blank, so I just started talking. I was honest. I told them I didn't know all the technical specifics, but I knew how to manage people, how to untangle a messy timeline, how to get a team to work together. I told them about the time at my old job, when a key supplier went bankrupt a week before a major launch, and how we had to pivot overnight. I wasn't slick or polished. I was just me, authentic, a little frazzled but real. And they loved it. I could see it in their faces. They were tired of corporate robots. I guess they asked more questions, not about my resume, but about how I thought, how I handled pressure. The interview ran over by 20 minutes. As I left, one of them, a woman with kind eyes, said that was the most refreshing interview we've had all month. I walked out feeling like I'd just survived a hurricane, but somehow the house was still standing. I got the offer 2 days later. The salary was more than I'd ever dreamed of making. It was a lifeline. I accepted immediately over the phone, my voice shaking with relief. I asked about the team, the projects, but it was all a blur of new information, names and titles that didn't mean anything to me. Yet I was just so grateful to have a way forward. The idea that this could be anything other than a lucky break never even crossed my mind. Hated all of it. My first day was a whirlwind. New badge, new laptop, a stack of forms to sign. I met a dozen people in the first hour, their names disappearing from my memory as soon as they were said. My assistant, a wonderfully efficient young man named Ben, was guiding me through the schedule. Okay, next up is the team introduction, he said, leading me toward a large open-plan area with glass-walled meeting rooms along one side. This is your core project team. They're all very excited to meet you. We walked into the main meeting room, A group of about 8 people were already there, some sitting, some standing by the coffee station. They all turned. As we entered, Ben said, "Everyone, this is our new senior project manager." I put on my best professional smile, ready to introduce myself. And then I saw him. He was standing near the window, holding a white ceramic mug. He was wearing a blue shirt, I remembered. Because I was the one who bought it for him, our eyes locked across the room, the smile froze on my face. The air just went out of the room, the hum of conversation died instantly. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the entire world. I saw the color drain from his face. His grip on the mug tightened, so much I thought it might break. The shock was so total, so absolute, it felt like a physical impact. This wasn't a possibility. This wasn't even in the realm of conceivable outcomes. It was a cosmic joke. And I was the punchline. He was the first to move. He took a step forward, his voice, a low, strained whisper. "What are you doing here?" It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. Before I could even form a word, he continued, his voice rising. You planned this. This is some kind of sick revenge, isn't it? Stalking me to my job." He was looking at me, but talking to the rest of the team, trying to recruit them as witnesses to my insanity. "I can't believe you would go this far." I was just stunned. My mouth was open, but no sound came out. All I could feel was this profound, bone-deep awkwardness. This was my first day. I was supposed to be establishing authority, building rapport, and here was my ex-boyfriend, who dumped me on our anniversary, publicly accusing me of being a deranged mastermind. My silence, my genuine shock, he misinterpreted completely. He saw it as smugness, as a silent victory lap. Ben, my assistant, stepped in smoothly. "David, this is highly inappropriate. This is our new manager. She was hired through a completely standard process." But David wasn't listening. "Standard? You expect me to believe that this is a coincidence?" He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I want to speak to HR right now." The turning point came in the middle of the night. I was lying awake, staring at the ceiling, and a thought, clear and cold, cut through the misery. What if this isn't the end? What if this is the start? He thinks he's moved on up. What if I go so far up, he becomes a speck in my rearview mirror? It was a crazy thought, the kind of job I was thinking of, a senior director position at Ethelred Holdings. The biggest firm in the city was so far out of my league. It was a joke. But the anger fueled me. I got out of bed at. So that's what happened. My first hour as a manager was spent in an HR office with a very calm woman named Susan. While David sat across from me fuming, he laid out his entire case, the breakup, the timing, his absolute conviction that I had orchestrated this entire scenario to humiliate him. Susan listened patiently, then she turned to me. "Can you walk me through your application process?" So I did. I told her about losing my apartment, about the desperate scattergun approach to job applications. I told her about the interview mishaps, the spilled coffee, the dropped papers. I didn't try to make it sound good. I just told the truth. Susan pulled up my application file on her computer. She saw the date I applied. It was the day after our anniversary, the day after he left. She saw the notes from the interviewer's candidate was unpolished, but authentic, displayed remarkable problem-solving skills under pressure. There was no mention of David. There was no way there could have been. Susan looked at David, her expression neutral, but firm. "David, the hiring process was entirely separate. There is no evidence of any orchestration. Your new manager was selected based on her merits. This appears to be a significant coincidence." I watched the realization dawn on his face. It wasn't a plot, it was just fate. It was luck. My bad luck had somehow turned into good luck. And his good luck had just evaporated. The humiliation on his face was deeper than any anger he had shown before. To be defeated by a rival is one thing. To be undone by a random, indifferent universe is something else entirely. It was more emasculating than anything I could have possibly planned. That first week, I thought about quitting every single day. The tension was unbearable. He would barely look at me in meetings. Every interaction was stiff, formal, dripping with resentment. The rest of the team could feel it. It was toxic. I thought, is this really worth it? Is any salary worth this daily drama? But then I looked at the work. The projects were challenging, interesting. The other team members, once they got past the initial weirdness, were talented and supportive. I realized I had earned this, however bizarre the path I had gotten here. Because a panel of executives saw something in me. This wasn't his company, he was letting me into it, was my company that he happened to work for. So I decided to stay. I decided to be professional. I praised his work. When it was good, I gave him clear, constructive feedback. When it wasn't, I didn't seek him out. But I didn't avoid him either, I just did my job, and I was good at it. I started to thrive. I found a confidence I didn't know I had. And I watched him. He remained trapped in his own bitterness, in his paranoid narrative. He couldn't accept the sheer randomness of it all. To him, it had to mean something. And because he couldn't find the meaning, he just festered. He became a smaller version of himself. 3 a.m. went to my laptop and found the listing. It had been posted that day. It felt like a sign. The irony didn't escape me. He left me because he felt trapped. And now here he was, truly trapped, reporting to the woman he discarded in a job he couldn't easily leave without looking like he was running away. The power dynamic was a fact, but the real closure came from seeing how little I needed to wield it. My success was the revenge I never wanted or sought. His bitterness was his own prison. And I was finally completely free. The phone screen went black. The call had ended. And the silence that followed was the loudest, most suffocating sound I had ever heard. He was supposed to be on his way. Dinner reservations at 8. I was already in my dress. He said he couldn't do it anymore, that he'd been thinking about it for a while. And he chose our anniversary to tell me the date on my phone, the little notification from a photo memory app showing a picture of us from 3 years ago. It all felt like a sick joke. I didn't move. I just sat on the edge of the bed, the silk of my dress feeling cold and ridiculous against my skin. And then the first sob broke through. It wasn't a gentle cry. It was ugly. It was this raw, guttural sound that tore out of me. And once it started, I couldn't stop. I curled into a ball on the floor right there on the rug. And just let it happen. The pain was so physical, a crushing weight on my chest. I couldn't breathe. I was gasping between sobs, my face wet and hot, my whole body shaking. This wasn't just sadness. This was humiliation. This was my entire world, the future I had pictured, just dissolving into nothing on a Tuesday night. I have no idea how long I was there, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. But then there was a sound at the door, a key turning in the lock. I flinched, a stupid, fleeting hope flashing that it was him, that it was all a mistake. But it was Sarah, my best friend. She must have had her key for emergencies. She walked in. And she didn't say a word. She just dropped her bag, came over to the floor, and wrapped her arms around me. She held me while I cried, really cried, my makeup smearing all over her shoulder. She didn't tell me it would be okay. She didn't try to fix it. She just let me fall apart. After a while, when the sobs had subsided into shaky breaths, she got up. I heard her in the kitchen, the clink of a glass, the pop of a cork. She came back with a bottle of red wine, 2 huge glasses, and a tub of chocolate ice cream. She sat back down on the floor with me cross-legged and handed me a glass drink. She said, and I did. Then she shoved the ice cream and a spoon at me. Eat, she said, and we just sat there on the floor in our nice clothes, drinking wine and eating ice cream straight from the container. That was the first lifeline, that simple, silent understanding. The next day the group chat exploded. It was Sarah, Chloe, and Maya. They had a plan that night. It was a mandatory movie night at Chloe's apartment. They showed up with every cheesy romantic comedy they could find. But about halfway through the first one, Maya grabbed the remote and switched to a ridiculous action movie. Instead, nope, she declared, we're not doing that to ourselves tonight. They forced me to laugh. They ordered a disgusting amount of pizza. They didn't let me sit in the silence. And that became the pattern for weeks. They orchestrated my life. Sarah would call every morning just to make sure I got out of bed. Chloe signed me up for a brutal early morning spin class with her and literally dragged me there. Maya would show up unannounced on weekends with a plan, anything from a hike to just a drive to the beach. They were a rotating guard against my own despair. They didn't let me cancel plans. They didn't let me hide. They picked up the pieces of me one by one and held them together. I spent every waking minute of the next month on that application. I called in every favor I had. I worked with a career coach. I stayed up until dawn studying the company's financials, their corporate structure, their competitors. I practiced interview questions until my answers were sharp and confident. The grief was still there, a dull ache. But I used it every time I felt that pang of sadness. I'd channel it into another hour of research. This wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about rebuilding. Until I was strong enough to do it myself. Months drifted by. The sharp stabbing pain had dulled into a constant heavy ache. I was going through the motions. My job, it was fine. It paid the bills. But it was a dead end, a comfortable, familiar rut. I'd been there for years. And the thought of updating my resume, of putting myself out there, felt impossible. The rejection from him had seeped into everything, making me feel like I wasn't worthy of anything better. That's when the email from Sarah came. It was just a link with a simple message: look at this. It was a job listing, a senior management position at a new fast-growing tech firm. The title alone made my stomach clench. The responsibilities listed were huge: leading a team, strategic planning. It was everything I had once wanted before I'd settled. I immediately texted back, "No way, I am not qualified for that." The responses were instantaneous. "Chloe, yes, you are. Read the description again. That's literally your current job. But with a better title. Maya, your current company is holding you back. You've said it yourself 100 times. Sarah, just look at it. That's all I'm asking." They wouldn't let it go that night. They all came over. They brought takeout and their laptops. They made me dig out my old resume. We sat around my kitchen table, and they bullied me into rewriting it. Chloe, who works in HR, pointed out all the keywords I needed to add. Maya helped me reframe my accomplishments, making them sound impactful instead of just a list of duties. Sarah poured the wine and provided moral support. They made me practice answering interview questions. They grilled me, throwing curveballs, making me think on my feet. "Why should we hire you?" Maya would ask in a serious, low voice, pretending to be a stern interviewer, and I'd stumble through an answer. "No." Chloe would interrupt, "Say it like you believe it. You are the best person for this job." After a particularly brutal mock interview, I slumped back in my chair. "I can't do this," I whispered. Sarah reached over and put her hand on mine. You absolutely can. This is your shot. You've been sleepwalking for too long." Maya nodded. "He took enough from you. Don't let him take your career too." And then Chloe, ever the pragmatist, laid down the terms. "Okay, here's the deal. You apply for this job, you go to the interview, you knock it out of the park. And when you get it, we are all going to Mexico, a full week, all-inclusive, and you're paying for the first round of margaritas." It was a joke, but it was also a pact. They had so much faith in me that they were already planning the victory lap. That belief, that unwavering certainty from them, started to become my own. The interview process was a whirlwind: a phone screen, a panel interview, and then a final meeting with the department head. I walked out of that last one feeling like I'd left everything I had in that room. A week later, the offer came. The salary was more than I'd ever dreamed of. The title was a leap forward. I called the group chat. The scream that came through the phone was deafening. We were going to Mexico. Myself from the ground up, piece by piece, into someone he could never touch. My first day was a blur of onboarding, new laptop, HR paperwork, a tour of the bright modern office. I was nervous, but excited. This was a fresh start. My new assistant, a cheerful young woman named Jess, was giving me a rundown of my team. She was going through the names one by one, and then she said it, his name. I felt the blood drain from my face. My ears started ringing. I must have misheard. I asked her to repeat it. She did. There was no mistake. He worked here on my team. I think I mumbled something to Jess about needing to use the restroom. I walked my legs feeling like jelly down the hallway. I pushed the door open, stumbled into a stall, and locked it. I sat on the closed toilet, lid my head in my hands. I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. Of all the companies in the city, he was here. The humiliation of our last conversation came rushing back. The pity I imagined on his face. The idea of seeing him every day, of him reporting to me. It was too much. My hands were trembling. I was on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. I pulled out my phone. My fingers were shaking so badly I could barely type. I just sent a message to the group chat. He works here. He's on my team. The phone started vibrating immediately. Not one call, but three, all trying to come through at once. I answered Sarah's. "Hey," I whispered, my voice shaky. "Breathe." She said, her voice calm and firm. "Just breathe with me, in and out." I tried to match her breathing. Then I heard a beep. Chloe and Maya had joined the call. It was a conference call right there in the bathroom stall. "Okay," Chloe said, her voice all business. "Listen to me. This changes nothing. You earned this job. You are qualified. You are his boss." Maya chimed in. "This is the universe being hilarious. And also kind of awesome. You hold all the cards now." Remember that. Sarah's voice was soft but steady. "Remember who you are. You are not the woman he left on the floor. You are the woman who aced 3 interviews for this job. You are the woman we celebrated with tequila shots. That's who you are." They took turns. They reminded me of the late nights we spent working on my resume. They reminded me of the spin classes I hated but never quit. They reminded me of the Pact of Mexico. They reframed the entire situation. "This isn't a disaster," Chloe said. "This is your victory lap. He gets a front row seat to see how amazing you're doing without him." Their words were a shield. Their belief in me, became a suit of armor, the panic started to recede replaced by a slow-burning sense of resolve. They were had an invisible army standing with me. I was not alone. I stood up, I smoothed down my blazera, new one I'd bought for this day. I walked over to the mirror, my eyes were a little red, but my posture was straight. I looked at my reflection and saw all of them standing behind me: Sarah's stubborn love, Chloe's fierce pragmatism, Maya's unshakable confidence. I took a deep final breath and walked out of the restroom. I walked back to my new office. Jess was at her desk outside. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Everything's fine," I said, and my voice was steady. "Could you please ask him to come see me? I'd like to introduce myself." The interview was a blur. I walked into that sleek, silent boardroom and looked the panel of executives in the eye. I didn't see bosses, I saw stepping stones. I talked about market disruption and strategic growth, and my voice didn't waver once. I could feel them leaning in, impressed. When I left, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had done everything I could. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock on my door. It opened, and there he was. He looked exactly the same but smaller. Somehow his face was a mask of polite professionalism that instantly shattered into stunned recognition. His mouth actually dropped open. I saw the confusion, the shock, and then the dawning understanding. I stayed seated behind my desk. I didn't smile, I didn't frown. "Hello," I said, my voice calm. "And even I am the new director. I'll be overseeing your team. I've reviewed the project timelines, and I'd like to go over the Q2 deliverables with you first thing tomorrow morning. Let's say 9 o'clock. He just stood there for a second, blinking, then he nodded, muttering a yes of course before quickly turning and leaving. There was no confrontation, no drama, just a simple professional exchange, where I held all the authority. The power dynamic had shifted completely and irrevocably, and it felt natural, it felt right. That Friday, we all met at our favorite restaurant. I was late because my new team had insisted on taking me out for a welcome drink. When I walked in, they cheered. Sarah had already ordered a bottle of champagne. We clinked glasses to Mexico. Chloe said, grinning, "To new jobs." Maya added. Sarah looked at me, her eyes shining. "To you." I looked around the table at these three women who had carried me, pushed me, and rallied for me. The laughter, the noise of the restaurant, the clinking of glasses. It wasn't an illusion this time. It was the sound of my real life, a life built not on the shaky foundation of a romance, but on the solid, unshakable ground of true friendship. The victory wasn't just the job title or the salary. The victory was this moment right here, surrounded by my support system, knowing I had shown up for myself, because they never stopped showing up for me. The thing about karma is you never really see it coming. You think you understand the rules, you think you're playing one game, and then the entire board just flips over, and you realize you were never the player, you were the piece. It started on our anniversary, our 5th. I'd made reservations at that little Italian place. He always said he wanted to try. I'd bought a new dress. I'd even dug out an old photo album, thinking we could laugh about how young we looked. When we first met, I was setting the table for a romantic dinner at home. Just a small thing. Before we went out, when he walked in, his suitcase was by the door before I even registered what was happening. He didn't sit down, he just stood there in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, and said he couldn't do it anymore, that he felt trapped, that he needed space to find himself. The words were so cliché, they almost sounded rehearsed. And maybe they were. I stood there holding 2 fancy wine glasses, completely frozen. I remember the cold feel of the crystal in my hands, the only real sensation in a world that was suddenly turning to fog. I asked him if it was someone else. He had the decency to look at the floor. He didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. That was the first cut. The second was when he picked up his suitcase and walked out, leaving me standing in a kitchen that smelled like the sauce I'd spent all afternoon making. The front door clicked shut, and it was the loudest, most final sound I had ever heard. But that was just the beginning. The real injury came in the weeks that followed. Through mutual friends, I'd hear things, little snippets he'd let slip when he was out with his new crowd, that he'd dodged a bullet, that he was finally free to live his life without being tied down. He painted me as this anchor, this weight that had been holding him back from his true potential. He'd say things like, "I just had to cut the dead weight, you know," and people would tell me, thinking they were being sympathetic, but each word was. 2 weeks later, the call came. The head of HR, her voice professional but warm. They were offering me the position, director of strategic development. The salary number she quoted was so large I had to write it down to make sure I'd heard it correctly. I hung up the phone, and I didn't scream or jump for joy. I just sat in my new apartment, the one Id rented after moving out of our shared place. And I smiled. It was a slow, deep, satisfied smile. The game hadn't even started yet, and I already knew. Like a fresh paper cut small precise, and they stung for days. I heard he'd gotten a new apartment, a promotion at work, that he was living this golden boy life completely unburdened. And there, I was trying to remember how to be a person, how to eat a full meal, how to sleep through the night, without waking up to the empty space beside me. The injustice of it was a physical ache. It felt like he had taken everything from me and was using it to build a better life for himself, and he was boasting about it. I had to get out of that city. Every corner held a memory, so I updated my resume. I started applying for jobs aggressively, anything that would take me a few states away. I'd been a senior project manager at my old firm, and I had a good track record. I landed a few interviews. One was for a consulting role, a pretty senior position at a large tech company. It was a fixer position. They said a department was underperforming, morale was low, and a recent project had gone completely off the rails. They needed someone to come and assess the damage and restructure the team. It sounded like exactly the kind of challenging, all-consuming work I needed. I threw myself into the preparation. Interviews were intense over video calls. I met with a panel from their executive team. They were frustrated. They said the department head had let things slide, that there was a lack of accountability. They mentioned a specific Project Chimera, that had blown the budget and missed every single deadline. The lead on that project, they said, had been arrogant, uncommunicative, and had basically gone rogue. They were looking for someone to clean up the mess and make some hard decisions. I laid out my plan. I talked about process reengineering, about accountability structures, about rebuilding team trust. They liked what they heard. They offered me the job. I accepted, without a second thought. I never even asked for the names of the team members. It didn't seem important. My first day was a Monday. I wore my best power suit, the one I'd bought for my final interview. I walked into the sleek, glass-fronted building, my new badge feeling heavy around my neck. I was taken to my new office. It was bigger than I'd expected, with a view of the city. On my desk was a thick file. The label read Project Chimera, Post-Mortem Personnel, Review. My first official task. My assistant, a kind-faced woman named Brenda, brought me a coffee. "They've scheduled a meeting for you at 10, she said, with the project lead for Chimera. "His name is Mark. Y'all see, he's been a bit of a problem." Mark, the name didn't register at first. It's a common name. My heart was pounding, but I chalked it up to first-day nerves. I spent the next hour buried in the file, and as I read, a cold, hard knot began to form in my stomach. The details were damning. The project lead had ignored established protocols. He'd made unilateral decisions that cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. He'd been dismissive of feedback from his own team. The reports described him as arrogant, resistant to authority, and completely unapologetic about the failure. He'd even missed crucial meetings in the final weeks. The picture it painted was of someone who thought the rules didn't apply to them. How it would end. There was a knock on my door at 10 o'clock sharp. Brenda poked her head in. "Mark is here for you." "Send him in," I said, not looking up from the file. I wanted to finish the sentence I was reading. I heard the door open and footsteps on the carpet. I finally looked up, ready to greet my new subordinate, and the world stopped. It was him, my Mark, 5 years of my life, standing in the doorway of my new office. He was paler than I remembered. He'd lost a little weight, but the shock on his face was a mirror of my own. His eyes darted from my face to the nameplate on my desk, to the Project Chimera file open in front of me. The color drained from his cheeks. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the faint hum of the computer, the distant sound of traffic 20 floors below. I watched the understanding dawn on him. It wasn't just that I was here. It was why I was here. I was the new boss, the fixer, the person hired specifically to deal with the mess he had created. I slowly closed the file. The sound of the folder snapping shut seemed to jolt him. "Mark," I said. My voice was calm, steadier than I felt. "Please have a seat." He moved like a robot, pulling out the chair across from me and sitting down heavily. He couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at my hands, at the file, at anything but me. "I've been reviewing the Chimera project," I began, my tone professional, detached. "The reports are concerning. I'd like to hear your perspective on the budget overruns in the third quarter." He flinched. This was the man who had told our friends I was dead weight, the man who had boasted about his freedom. Now He was squirming in his chair, trying to formulate an answer to a question. He clearly hadn't prepared, for he started to speak his words, stumbling over each other, excuses, blaming other team members, blaming a lack of support from management. It was the same arrogance I'd read about in the file, but now it was tinged with a desperate, panicky edge. I listened, I didn't interrupt, I just let him talk himself deeper into a hole. With every passing second, I could see the reality of his situation sinking in. His professional fate was in my hands. The woman he had left on our anniversary, the woman he had dismissed as a burden, now held his career in her hands. And it wasn't because of some vengeful scheme I had concocted, it was because of his own actions, his own negligence, his own arrogance. The morning of my first day, I took my time. I put on the sharpest, most expensive suit I owned. I did my makeup not to look pretty, but to look powerful. I looked in the mirror, and I didn't see the heartbroken woman from the anniversary dinner. I saw a director. The walk from the elevator bank to the main office doors felt like walking onto a stage. The reception area was all glass and steel, hushed and important. The receptionist looked up, her eyes widening slightly at the authority in my step. I am here. He finally trailed off. The excuses ran dry. He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw the full, horrifying comprehension in his eyes. This wasn't a coincidence, this was cause and effect. His failure at work had created a vacancy. My competence and drive had filled it. His path and my path had collided, not by my design, but by his. The initial assessment is that the project failure rests primarily on leadership oversight. I said, my voice, even my recommendation to the executive committee, will be to place you on administrative leave pending a full review. He just nodded. There was nothing left for him to say. He stood up, his movements slow and defeated. He walked to the door without another word and left, closing it softly behind him. I sat there for a long time after he was gone. The office was quiet. I looked out the window at the city stretching out below me. I thought about all the pain, all the humiliation I had felt. I thought about him calling me dead weight. And I realized the profound truth of what had just happened. Karma isn't about revenge. It's not about getting even. It's a simple, natural law. The energy you put out into the world, the choices you make, they have consequences. His choice to be cruel, to be boastful, to be negligent, they weren't isolated incidents. They were threads that he himself had woven into a rope. And today he walked right into the noose he had tied. I was just the one who happened to be standing there holding the other end. I didn't have to pull it tight, his own weight did that. You know, I used to think our anniversary was the most important day of the year. I'd plan for weeks, a special dinner, a thoughtful gift, making sure everything was just perfect. It was like my entire sense of security was tied to that one date on the calendar, a confirmation that we were okay, that I was enough. But looking back, the signs were always there, woven into the everyday fabric of our life together. I'd come home buzzing with an idea, like maybe I should go back to school for my degree or try for a certification in project management. I'd lay it all out for him, the timeline, the potential, the long-term benefit. And he'd listen with this patient smile, the kind you give a child talking about becoming an astronaut. When I finished, he'd pat my hand and say something like, "That's cute, honey, but let's be realistic. That's a really competitive field, or you've got a good thing here. Why rock the boat?" He never said no outright. It was always a gentle deflection, a subtle redirect. He framed it as concern, as practicality. "I just worry y'all get in over your head. Those late nights studying would be tough on you." He made my ambition sound like a naive hobby, something to be managed and contained, not encouraged. I started to shrink my own dreams to fit the space he allowed for them. I stopped talking about the big ideas. I'd mention a small online course, and he'd say, "Sure, if it makes you happy," in a tone that suggested it was the equivalent of taking a pottery class. My potential was something he tolerated, not something he believed in. And the worst part was I started to believe his version of me, that I was comfortable where I was, that aiming high was for other people who were naturally more driven, more capable. By 730, the first little knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I sent a casual text, "Hey, running late, everything okay?" I watched the screen, waiting for those little dots to appear. Nothing. The message just sat there, delivered but unread. I went to the kitchen and turned the oven down to warm the rich smell of the food starting to feel cloying. "To see Mr. Davison," I said. "I am the new director of strategic development." So that anniversary, our fifth, I had it all planned. I'd booked his favorite restaurant. I'd bought a watch he'd been eyeing for months. I was wearing a new dress, feeling hopeful, pushing down that little voice that wondered if he'd even noticed I'd got my hair done. He was late coming home from work, which wasn't unusual. But when he walked in, his energy was different, distant. He didn't comment on the dress. He just sat down on the couch and didn't really look at me. I remember asking if he was ready to go, trying to keep my voice light, and he let out this long sigh. He said, "We need to talk." Those words, they changed the air in a room instantly. He told me he'd been doing a lot of thinking about his life, his career, where he was headed. He said he felt stagnant. And then he looked right at me. And his eyes weren't cruel, they were just empty. He said, "I think I need to be with someone who's on the same path, someone more ambitious, more driven. I just don't see that fire." You. It was like being doused in ice water. The anniversary decorations suddenly looked cheap. And sad, the dress felt like a costume he had framed my entire existence, my personality, as the thing holding him back. My lack of drive was the problem. He wasn't just breaking up with me. He was delivering a final verdict on my character. I was small, I was incapable, I was not enough. I remember sitting there numb as he packed a bag. The dinner reservation came, and when I just sat in the silence, he left behind the truth of his words, sinking in. He needed someone better, and I was never going to be that. The days after were a blur of gray. I cried. I felt so incredibly stupid. I replayed every conversation, every dismissed idea, and saw it all clearly. He had never seen me as an equal. I was just a placeholder, a comfortable stop on his way to something greater. The humiliation was a physical weight. I'd built my life around this person who fundamentally believed I was lacking. But then something shifted. It wasn't a loud, dramatic moment. It was a quiet click in my mind. Late one night, the tears dried up, and in their place was this cold, clear anger. It wasn't even about him anymore, not really. It was about the version of me he had created, the version I had accepted. That version was a lie. The fire he said he couldn't see, it was there. It had just been banked, smothered by his condescension and my own need for his approval. Now it ignited. It was a brutal, burning desire. Prove him wrong, not to win him back, God. No, to prove to myself that his entire assessment of me was a catastrophic error. I quit my comfortable, dead-end job. The next week I enrolled in a demanding accelerated degree program. Online, something I could do while working. I took the first job I could find, an entry-level admin position at a small tech firm. It paid terribly, and the work was boring. But it was a foot in the door. I treated every single task, no matter how mundane, as if it were the most important project in the world. I arrived early, I stayed late, I asked questions, I volunteered for things that were outside my job description, things that scared me. I followed her through the maze of cubicles. I could feel the stares, the whispers. New bosses always cause a stir. I kept my gaze straight ahead, my posture perfect. And then I saw him. Mark, he was at his desk, in a sea of other mid-level analysts, staring intently at his monitor. He looked the same, but smaller somehow. His shirt was slightly wrinkled. He was laughing at something. A colleague said that same easy laugh. I'd fallen for it, made my skin crawl. While my friends were going out, I was home with my textbooks and my laptop. I lived on cheap coffee and determination. There were nights I was so tired I thought I'd break. I'd hear his voice in my head, "Let's be realistic." And it would just make me angrier, more focused. This grind became my entire life. It was my secret. I didn't post about my classes on social media. I didn't complain about the long hours. I just put my head down and worked. I was building a new version of myself, brick by brick. The quiet, it was my project, my masterpiece, and no one was going to dismiss it as cute. Months turned into a year, then two. I moved from that admin job to a junior analyst role at a bigger company. I soaked up everything I could. I built a portfolio of work that was genuinely impressive, full of quantifiable results and successful projects. I wasn't just going through the motions. I was becoming an expert. The quiet grind had forged a real confidence in me. I didn't need anyone's validation anymore. I knew what I was capable of. Then I saw the listing, a leadership role at a major consulting firm, a director position. It was a huge leap, the kind of job I would never have even considered applying for before. The kind of job he would have laughed at me for wanting. I read the description, and something in me just clicked. I was qualified, more than qualified. I spent a week tailoring my resume, preparing my portfolio, rehearsing my answers. The old fear tried to whisper, but it was so faint now. I walked into that interview not as the woman he left, but as the woman I had built. The interview was tough, a panel of 3 senior partners, grilling me on strategy, on leadership philosophy, on past failures. But I was ready. I spoke with an authority that felt natural, because I had earned it. I presented my portfolio, and I could see their expressions change from polite interest to genuine surprise. I wasn't just answering their questions, I was demonstrating a track record. When one of them asked why such a rapid career progression, "It's quite a jump." I didn't flinch. I said my previous trajectory didn't align with my capacity. I took the time to intentionally build the skills necessary for a role like this. It was the truth, and it sounded like the truth. A week later the offer came. The salary was more than I ever imagined. The title was Director of Operational Strategy. I accepted without a moment's hesitation. I allowed myself one small private smile. This was it, the moment the quiet work went public. I found out later through the grapevine that he still worked there. He'd been there for years, moving laterally, never quite making the leap to management. He was comfortable. He heard the rumors, of course. The whole department was buzzing about this new hire, this rising star. They'd poached from a competitor. They talked about my credentials, my reputation for turning teams around. He must have wondered who this person was. My first day, I dressed with a kind of calm focus. This wasn't about revenge. It was a presentation of fact. I walked through the familiar lobby. I'd worked here our entire relationship, but it felt entirely new. I was shown to my new office, a corner space. With a view, the team was gathered for an introductory meeting. I could feel the curious eyes as I walked toward the conference room. The receptionist led me right past his aisle. She stopped at the door to a large corner office and turned to the room. "Everyone, if I could have your attention for a moment." She announced. The low hum of conversation died. Dozens of faces turned toward us. Marks was one of the last. He glanced up, annoyed at the interruption, his eyes sliding over me without recognition at first. Then they snapped back. I watched the whole process unfold on his face in slow motion, the casual glance, the double take, the confusion, as I pushed the door open, and there he was sitting near the back, looking bored, probably waiting for this new boss to give some boring corporate speech. He glanced up. As I walked to the front of the room, I saw the process on his face in real time. First simple non-recognition, then a flicker of confusion. His brow furrowed, his eyes scanned my face, my professional attire, the confident way I stood. And then it hit him. The color drained from his face, his jaw went slack. He actually leaned forward, as if trying to correct a trick of the light. It was her, the woman he left, because she wasn't driven enough, the woman whose ambitions he called cute, standing at the head of the table, his new boss. I smiled, a professional, polite smile, and introduced myself to the team. I laid out my vision for the department, my expectations. My voice was steady and clear. I made eye contact with everyone, including him. His gaze was locked on me, a mixture of sheer shock and dawning horror. He looked small. The person who had made me feel so small for so long was now shrinking in his chair, trying to process the impossible reality. In the weeks that followed, I did my job. I was fair, I was demanding, I was supportive. I earned the team's respect quickly. Because I knew what I was doing, I could see the results. Everyone, except him, he struggled. He'd come into my office for one-on-ones, and he could barely look at me. His work, which had always been adequate, started to slip. He was flustered, unfocused. It was like his entire understanding of the world had been shattered. The hierarchy he believed in, the one where he was naturally superior, had been inverted. He tried once to talk to me about it. After a meeting, he lingered and said, I had no idea you were all this." He gestured vaguely at the office, at me. I just looked at him and said, "Why would you have it?" Wasn't something I felt the need to perform, and that was the truth. My journey wasn't for show, it was for me. Watching him struggle to reconcile the person he thought I was with the reality standing in front of him was the final piece of closure. It had nothing to do with him anymore. His opinion was irrelevant. The triumph wasn't in his shock or his discomfort. The triumph was in the quiet knowledge that I had done it. I had taken his dismissal, the most painful moment of my life, and used it as fuel to build a life he could never have imagined for me. The moral is so simple, but you have to live it to understand. It never ever let someone else's limited vision of you define what you are capable of becoming. Their vision is a reflection of their own limitations, not yours. The only person who gets to decide your potential is you. I remember thinking our anniversary dinner was going to be perfect. I'd booked the table at that little Italian place. We loved, the one with the red checkered tablecloths and the candles stuck in a Chianti bottle. I was so excited. I'd even bought a new dress. It felt like a real milestone. 2 whole years, I thought we were solid. But you were quiet all through dinner, not a bad quiet, just distant. I kept trying to make conversation asking about your work, your friends. But you just give me these short answers. And then go back to staring at your plate. I remember the way the candlelight flickered in your eyes. And for a second, I thought it was just the reflection. But it wasn't, it was something else, a wall had gone up. His brain tried to place me in this context. Then the dawning horror, the color drained from his face, leaving him pale, and waxy. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. We got back to your apartment, and I was still trying to shake this weird feeling. I thought maybe you were just tired. Then you sat down on the edge of the couch. And you wouldn't look at me. You just started talking, your voice so low and flat. You said you'd been doing a lot of thinking. That phrase alone, it's like a punch to the gut, isn't it? I've been doing a lot of thinking. You told me I was amazing, that I deserved the world, and that you were the problem. You said you weren't ready, not for the kind of seriousness I obviously wanted. You said you looked at me and saw a future, a real one, with a house and maybe kids. And it terrified you. You said it wasn't fair to me to string me along when you couldn't give me what I deserved. You made it sound so noble, like you were letting me go for my own good. And I just stood there. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my throat. The whole room felt like it was tilting. I remember my hands were cold. I remember the sound of the traffic outside your window, how normal it all seemed. While my world was breaking apart, I asked you if there was someone else. You said no, it wasn't. That it was just you, your own fear, your own inability to commit. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, not then. I just felt this numbness spreading through me. This profound sense of rejection. You were ending it, not because of anything I did, but because of everything I was, because what I represented was too much for you. You left me on our anniversary because you were a coward, and the worst part was you framed it as an act of kindness. I moved out of our shared city a month later. I couldn't stay there. Every corner, every coffee shop held a memory. I took a job in another state, a step down really. But it was a clean break. I threw myself into work. It was the only thing that numbed the pain. I worked late nights and early mornings. I took on projects no one else wanted. I learned new skills. I pushed myself harder than I ever thought possible. The heartbreak, that feeling of being abandoned, it fueled me. It was like I had to prove to myself, and to the ghost of you, that I was worth more than you made me feel. It took years of building myself back up piece by piece. I stopped defining myself by that relationship. I found my own confidence. I stopped seeking validation from anyone else. I became good at my job, really good. I earned a reputation for being sharp, capable, and fair. The promotion to regional director was a surprise. But it wasn't an accident. I had worked for it. And the fact that the new territory included my old city, it felt like fate, not a romantic fate, but a kind of cosmic justice. I was going back, but I was coming back as someone completely new. I found out you were still at the same company, still in the same department. It was in the personnel files. A part of me wondered if you'd moved on, if you'd found that readiness you said you lacked. But the files just showed your title. It was the same one you'd had when I left. I didn't know what to feel about that. The morning of my introduction, my stomach was in knots. I put on my best suit. I looked in the mirror and saw a leader. I saw a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. I practiced my opening remarks in the hotel room. I was determined to be professional, composed, and utterly in command. I gave him a moment. I let him sit there in that shocking, terrible realization. Then I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was calm, professional, and utterly victorious. Good morning, everyone. I am sure Mr. Davison will be making a formal introduction later. But I wanted to quickly introduce myself. I am your new director of strategic development. I am very much looking forward to working with you all to take this department to the next level. My voice was steady, clear, and carried to every. Walking into that conference room was surreal. The same beige walls, the same scuff marks on the floor from the chairs. Some of the same faces were there. And then I saw you. You were sitting near the back, trying to look small. Our eyes met for just a second. And I saw it, the shock, the disbelief. It was all there on your face, raw and unguarded. You looked older, tired. There was a humility in your expression that I'd never seen before. I gave my speech. I talked about my vision for the region, my doorways open policy. My voice was steady. I made eye contact with everyone in the room, including you. I held your gaze for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. I saw you swallow. I saw the way your shoulders tensed. The air in the room was so thick you could almost touch it. Everyone could feel the history hanging between us, this unspoken thing crackling in the silence. The first few weeks were a special kind of torture. We had to interact in meetings, you'd present your team's reports, and it'd have to ask questions your work was competent. But it lacked fire, it was safe, you never took risks. I could see the old fear was still there, just manifested differently now. You'd look at me. When you thought I wasn't watching, I could feel your eyes on me during presentations. There was a new respect there, but also a deep, profound regret. It was written all over you. We had to work together on the quarterly review. It meant long hours in my office, just the two of us surrounded by spreadsheets and projections. The professional mask was the only thing keeping us both sane. We talked about metrics and deadlines. But sometimes in the quiet moments, when the work was done for the day, the silence would stretch out. It was filled with everything. We weren't saying all the apologies and explanations that were sitting right there on the surface. One evening, it was late, the sun had gone down, and the office was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. We'd just finalized the last slide for the executive presentation. I was packing my bag feeling exhausted. You were still sitting across from my desk, just staring at your hands. And then you spoke. Your voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a knife. You said my name, not my professional title, but my name. You said, I need to say something. I know I don't have the right, but I need to say it. I stopped what I was doing and looked at you. I didn't say anything, I just waited. You took a deep breath. You didn't look at me. You kept your eyes fixed on your hands. You said what I did to you, leaving you like that it was the biggest mistake of my life. It wasn't noble. It was cowardly. I was scared. I saw how incredible you were, how you had your life together. And I felt inadequate. I thought if I stayed, it'd eventually disappoint you. So I ran. I told myself it was for you, but it was for me. It was pure selfishness. You finally looked up at me. Your eyes were honest and full of a pain. I recognized seeing you walk in here, seeing what you've become. It just confirms how much I lost, how much I threw away. Because I was too immature to handle something real. I am so sorry for the pain I caused you, for the way I did it. I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know that I know what I did. I stood there, my bag in my hand. The apology hung in the air between us. It was everything I'd wanted to hear years ago. But now it was different. It didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the hurt. But it was real. It was an admission, not an excuse. Corner of the room, I held my smile for a beat longer, my eyes locking with his. Then I turned and walked into my new office, closing the door softly behind me. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. I said thank you for telling me, and I left the office. Something shifted after that. The tension didn't disappear, but it changed. It became less about our past and more about the people we are now. We started to work together more easily. There was a new layer of respect. You stopped treating me like your ex-girlfriend and started treating me like your boss. You began to offer better ideas in meetings. You took on more responsibility. It was like a weight had been lifted off you too. We found a rhythm. We'd have coffee in the break room and talk about work, about the industry. Sometimes we'd talk about neutral things like a movie we'd both seen or a book we'd read. It was tentative, these conversations, like we were building a new bridge very slowly and testing each plank before we put our full weight on it. I started to see the man you'd become, the one who had lived with his regret. You were humbler, more thoughtful. You listened more than you talked. The fear I saw in you before seemed to have been replaced by a quiet determination. You weren't the same person who broke my heart, and I wasn't the same woman whose heart he broke. It's a strange feeling, this hopeful uncertainty. The past is still there, a part of our story. But it's not the whole story anymore. We're building something new, not a romance. Not yet, maybe not ever, but a foundation of mutual respect, of seeing each other clearly for the first time without the illusions and the fears. It feels fragile, this new thing. But it feels real, and for now that feels like enough. The rest of the day was a masterclass in professional detachment. He tried to corner me twice, once by the coffee machine, where he muttered, we need to talk. I simply said, my calendar is managed by my assistant Mark. Please schedule a meeting if you have a work-related matter to discuss. The second time, he sent a long, rambling email full of apologies and excuses. I deleted it without reading past the first line. The real power wasn't in a dramatic confrontation. It was in the quiet, precise application of authority. In the first departmental meeting, I praised the work of everyone on his team, except him. I reassigned his pet project, the one he was counting on for his next review, to a bright, ambitious junior hire. When he presented his quarterly report, I asked pointed, difficult questions that exposed the shallow thinking behind his numbers. I wasn't cruel. I was exacting. I held him to a standard he couldn't possibly meet, and I did it all with a polite, impersonal tone that offered no quarter. By the end of the week, you could see the strain on him. He jumped when I walked past his desk. He stammered through his updates. The confidence he had in that bar photo was completely gone. He was shrinking. 800 p.m. The candle had burned down a little. I lit another one. I called him. It rang. And rang, then went to voicemail. His cheerful, familiar voice. Hey, you've reached Mark. Leave a message. Beep. I tried to sound light, unconcerned. Hey, just checking in. Dinner's ready when you are. I hung up. And immediately felt stupid for sounding so accommodating. Now I am sitting in my corner office. The sky outside is turning a deep twilight blue, and the city lights are starting to glitter. The silence in here is rich and full, not like the empty silence of that anniversary night. That was a silence of absence. This is a silence of presence. My presence. I can see my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I look poised in control. The anger is gone. The hurt has been transformed into something solid, something unshakable. He thought leaving me was a promotion. He thought he was moving on to something better. But he was wrong. He didn't just lose a girlfriend that night. He created his own boss. And in doing so, he gave me the one thing he never intended, to a power he can never ever take away. The morning of our 10th anniversary, I woke up early. The sun was just starting to come through the blinds, painting stripes across the empty side of the bed. I remember thinking, he must have gotten up already, maybe to make coffee to start the surprise he'd been hinting at. For weeks I could feel the anticipation, a little fizzy feeling in my chest. I padded out to the kitchen, expecting to see him there. But the room was silent. The coffee pot was cold. That's when I saw the envelope on the counter propped up against the fruit bowl. My name was written on it in his handwriting. It looked so ordinary for a second. I thought it was a card, part of the celebration. I opened it slowly. The paper felt flimsy in my hands. It wasn't a card. It was a letter, a short letter. He said he was sorry. He said he couldn't do this anymore. He said he'd already moved his things out, that he'd been planning this for a while. He said he hoped I would understand one day. That was it. 10 years, a decade of my life, reduced to a few paragraphs on a single sheet of paper. He left me on the day that was supposed to celebrate all of it. I didn't cry at first. I just stood there in the kitchen, holding the letter, reading the words over and over again, as if they would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. The silence in the apartment was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was a physical presence pressing in on me from all sides. I walked back to the bedroom and pulled open his side of the closet. Empty. Just a few bare hangers swinging gently. The drawers were empty too. He'd even taken his toothbrush from the bathroom. It was so calculated, so clean. He had erased himself without a trace, and he'd done it while I was sleeping right beside him. The rest of that day is a blur. I must have called in sick to work. I know. I ended up on the floor of the living room, just sitting there staring at the wall. Friends called. My phone buzzed constantly, with messages, probably people sending anniversary wishes, asking what our plans were. I turned it off. I couldn't bear it when my best friend Sarah showed up. Because I wasn't answering, she found me like that. She made me tea. She sat with me. She said all the right things. You're better off without him. He's a coward. Y'all get through this. The words were like stones skipping over the surface of a deep, dark lake. They didn't penetrate. They didn't help. How do you explain that your entire world has just evaporated? That the person you built your life around has decided you're not worth a conversation, let alone a future. The weeks that followed were worse in a way. The initial shock wore off, and what was left was this hollow, aching emptiness. Getting out of bed felt like a monumental achievement. Taking a shower was a victory. Going to work was like performing a play, saying my lines, pretending to be a functional human being, when inside I was just gone. My identity had been so tied to him, to us. I was his girlfriend, then his fiancée, then his wife. Who was I without that title? The answer seemed to be nobody, a shell of a person. By 900 p.m., the food was cold. The sauce had formed a skin on top. The knot in my stomach was a hard, cold stone. This wasn't traffic. This wasn't a dead phone battery. This was something else. I scrolled through my social media feeds, my thumb moving frantically, looking for a clue, any clue. His profile was quiet. Then I saw a post from one of his friends from a bar downtown, a group photo. And there he was in the corner of the frame, his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. He was laughing. His going through the motions. I'd look in the mirror and not recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were dead. The turning point was small. It was a Tuesday evening. I was staring at my phone, scrolling through old photos, torturing myself, and my thumb hovered over his contact. I must have done it 100 times before this ritual of almost calling him, almost texting him, begging for an explanation for anything. But that night something shifted. It was like a tiny spark of anger, a flicker of self-preservation. This was killing me. This cycle of pain was something I was actively choosing every time I looked him up. So with a trembling finger I pressed delete. I deleted his number. Then I went through my photos and deleted every picture of him of us. It felt brutal, like amputating a limb. But there was also a sense of relief. It was the first decision I'd made for myself by myself in a very long time. That one action gave me just enough strength to make another. I found a therapist sitting in that office. Talking to a complete stranger about the depths of my despair was terrifying. But it was also the first time I was truly honest about how lost I felt. She helped me see that my grief wasn't just about him leaving, it was about me leaving myself behind years ago. I had stopped doing the things I loved. I had let my own friendships fade. Because his circle became our circle, I had put a dream on a shelf and forgotten about it. I started to rebuild brick by painful brick. I called an old friend from college I hadn't spoken to in years. We went for coffee and it was awkward at first. But then we laughed. It was a real laugh. And it surprised me. I started saying yes to things even when I didn't feel like it. I went to a movie by myself. I signed up for a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to try. My hands were clumsy at first, covered in clay. But there was a satisfaction in creating something, anything from a lump of nothing. And then I remembered writing in high school and college. I used to write short stories, terrible poetry, long journal entries. I loved the feel of a pen in my hand, the way I could get lost in a sentence. He had never been dismissive of it, not exactly. But it was treated as a hobby, a cute little quirk. It wasn't a real career path. So I'd stopped one night. I dug out an old notebook from a box in the back of my closet. The pages were yellowed. I read my own words from a decade ago. And I felt a connection to that young woman. She had ideas, she had passion. She was buried under years of compromise. I started writing again, just for myself, at first. Then I started a blog, anonymously, just putting my thoughts out into the universe. It was about starting over. It was raw and honest. To my shock, people responded, they commented, they shared my posts. They said my words helped them. That feedback, that connection to strangers lit a fire in me I didn't know was still there. My confidence, my real confidence, not the kind that's dependent on someone else's approval, began to grow. Head thrown back, the timestamp was from 2 hours ago. It was through that blog that I saw the job posting, a content director position at a major tech firm. It was a huge leap from my current role in marketing. It required vision, leadership, a strong creative voice. The old me would have looked at that listing and immediately thought of all the reasons I wasn't qualified. I would have talked myself out of it. But the new me, the one who was slowly remembering who she was, read the description and thought, I can do that. I applied, not as a plan, not as any kind of revenge fantasy. Thought never even crossed my mind, but as a genuine test, a challenge to see if the person I was becoming was as strong as I hoped she was. Interview process was grueling. There were multiple rounds, presentations, tests. But with each step I felt more sure of myself. I was drawing on parts of my brain I hadn't used in years. I was talking about my ideas with a conviction that felt new and powerful. When the offer came, I was alone in my apartment. I read the email. And I sat down on the floor just like I had on that terrible anniversary morning. But this time, the tears that came were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. I had done it by myself, for myself. My first day was a whirlwind of new faces and names. The office was sleek and modern, all glass and steel. I was nervous, of course. But it was an excited nervousness. I was introduced to my team, shown to my new office. There was a welcome meeting scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main conference room. My boss, the CEO, wanted to introduce me to the wider department. I walked into the conference room a few minutes early. The large glass table was surrounded by people. I smiled, trying to look confident. I took a seat near the head of the table, and I let my gaze wander around the room, and then I saw him. It was like the air was sucked out of the room. He was sitting halfway down the table on the other side. He was looking down at his phone, a slight frown on his face, just like he always did when he was bored in a meeting. He looked exactly the same, maybe a little tired. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it felt like it had stopped entirely. A cold wave washed over me from my head to my toes. My mind started racing a frantic, panicked monologue. What is he doing here? How is this possible? This can't be happening. All the old feelings rushed back: the betrayal, the pain, the humiliation. I wanted to get up and run out of the room. I wanted to scream. I felt like that woman on the kitchen floor again, small and broken. But then I took a breath, a deep, slow breath. I looked at my hands clenched in my lap, and I consciously relaxed them. I looked back at him, and I saw him not as the man who shattered my life, but as an employee, a colleague, a part of the team I was now leading. In that moment, I had a choice. I could let the past define this moment. I could let his presence diminish my accomplishment. Or I could be the professional I had fought so hard to become, the woman who earned this seat at the table. The CEO started the meeting. He welcomed everyone. And then he gestured to me. Team, I am thrilled to introduce you to our new Director of Content Strategy. She comes to us with incredible vision. And I have no doubt she's going to take this department to new heights. All eyes were on me, including his. I saw the moment he recognized me. His eyes widened, the color drained from his face. He looked utterly stunned, like he was seeing a ghost. The room tilted, the perfect table, the cold food, the stupid dress, it all curdled into something pathetic. I felt a hot flush of shame spread across my chest and up my neck. How long had I been sitting here waiting? How long had he been out, having a great time? I clicked on the friend's profile, and there was another album celebrating the big promotion, more photos, him toasting with a cocktail, him looking smug, pleased with himself. And in one, a close-up of him and the same woman, their heads closed together. I stood up. I smiled, a calm professional smile. I looked around the room, making eye contact with a few people. And then finally my gaze landed on him. It was for just a second. I gave a slight polite nod, no different than I had given anyone else. Thank you, Mark. I'm truly excited to be here. I began. My voice was steady. It didn't tremble. I spoke about my vision for the role, about collaboration, about driving innovation. I was articulate. I was confident. I was in command of the room the entire time. I could feel his stare. It was a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. After the meeting, people came up to me to introduce themselves. He hung back, lingering by the door. I could see him out of the corner of my eye, pretending to look at his phone again. When the crowd cleared, he approached. He looked nervous. Hi, he said. His voice was quiet. Hello, I replied, my tone even friendly, but distant, the way you would speak to any new report. I had no idea you were, that this was. He stumbled over his words. I'm looking forward to working with the team, I said, cutting him off gently, but firmly. I've reviewed the Q2 reports. I'd like you to email me the raw data sets by end of day today, please. I turned to my new assistant, Jessica. Could you please show me the scheduling system? And I walked away. I didn't look back. That was the true victory. It wasn't about making him feel small. It wasn't about revenge. It was about me. In that moment, I saw the chasm between who I was when I was with him and who I had become without him. The victory was in my steady hand, my clear voice, my professional demeanor. It was in the fact that his presence was now irrelevant to my success. He was a subordinate, a part of the landscape. The power dynamic had shifted completely, not because of any plan of mine, but because I had grown. And he had stayed exactly the same. I saw his regret. It was in the way he looked at me in meetings, with a kind of bewildered respect. It was in the carefully worded emails, the excessive politeness. He was witnessing my competence, my grace under pressure, my leadership. And he was realizing exactly what he had thrown away. But that was his burden to carry, not mine. My victory was internal. It was the quiet knowledge that I had faced the worst pain imaginable. And I had not just survived it, I had used it to build a better, stronger, more complete version of myself. The role, the title, the office, were just the external proof. The real win was waking up every morning knowing that I was finally completely enough on my own. Caption underneath from his friend: looks like someone's moving on up in more ways than one. The silence he left behind was more than just empty space. It was a vacuum. And in that vacuum, a new kind of sound started to emerge. It wasn't the sound of crying, not for long anyway. It was the low, quiet hum of a machine, powering up my mind, which had been clouded by what I thought was love, became perfectly, chillingly clear. I sat at my kitchen table, the cold coffee from our unfinished anniversary breakfast still in the mug, and I started to analyze him not as the man I loved, but as a target, a problem to be solved. His vulnerabilities were so obvious once I looked with clear eyes. His vanity was his greatest weakness. His career was his entire identity. The thing he bragged about at every dinner party. The source of his confidence. To wound him, there would be a deeper cut than any emotional plea could ever make. That was the first piece of the blueprint. The objective was clear: find the one position that would put me directly above him, not as a colleague, not as an equal, as his superior, as his boss. I spent the next 72 hours in a deep dive. I researched his company Ascendancy Inc., their corporate structure, their recent mergers. I memorized the names on the leadership page. And there it was, the Vice President of Strategic Operations. It was a new role created to streamline departments. After a recent acquisition, it had oversight over his entire division with direct authority over project approvals, budget allocations, and performance reviews. It was perfect. It was the throne. Was going to build it piece by piece. The plan took shape with a brutal elegance. Phase 1 qualifications. I was good at my job, but I needed to be undeniable. I enrolled in an advanced executive leadership program. That weekend. Phase 2 positioning. I needed experience at a rival firm, a name on my resume that would make Ascendancy's board sit up and take notice. I identified the top competitor, Next Gen Solutions, and crafted a tailored application. Phase 3 infiltration. Once at Next Gen, I would identify and network with every Ascendancy board member and investor I could find through industry events, making myself a known quantity, a rising star. The final phase was the application itself. It wasn't just a job application. It was a checkmate move, years in the making. Every step was a milestone on a map I was drawing myself. The grind was methodical. It was waking up at 5 a.m. to study before work. It was spending my weekends on coursework. While my friends were out, I turned down dates. I skipped vacations. Every sacrifice was a deposit into an account of pure cold vengeance. The satisfaction wasn't in the moment. It was in the progress, passing the leadership program with top marks, getting the offer from Next Gen. The first time I saw a senior partner from Ascendancy at a conference and introduced myself, my handshake firm, my smile professional. I could see the impression I was making. They saw ambition, capability. They had no idea they were looking at a weapon being forged in plain sight. The day I submitted my application for the vice president role at Ascendancy, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in years. My resume was a work of art. It highlighted every achievement, every qualification. They were looking for, all polished to a blinding shine. My cover letter was a masterpiece of corporate speak, but laced with subtle hooks I knew would appeal to the specific board members I'd researched. I wasn't hoping for an interview, I was demanding one, with the sheer weight of my preparedness. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the room. The promotion, he'd mentioned it weeks ago, a possibility. He never said it had happened. He never said he'd be celebrating. He never said he wouldn't be coming home. Our anniversary. He'd forgotten our anniversary, or worse, he remembered and just didn't care. I sat there in the silence for a long time, just staring at the congealed fat on the plate. The betrayal wasn't a sharp, clean cut. It was a slow, crushing weight pressing down until I could barely. The phone call for the interview came on a Tuesday. My voice was steady, professional. I scheduled it for the following week. I didn't feel nervous. I felt like a surgeon walking into an operating room, knowing every step of the procedure by heart. The interview itself was almost anticlimactic. I sat across from the panel. The CEO, the COO, a few board members. They asked their questions about strategic vision, about managing complex teams, about fiscal responsibility. My answers were precise, data-driven, and confident. I could see them leaning in, their expressions shifting from cautious to impressed. There was one moment, a question about handling underperforming assets within a company. I allowed a very slight cold smile. I talked about objective metrics, about the importance of making difficult decisions for the health of the entire organization, about having the clarity to cut away what doesn't serve the greater good. I held the CEO's gaze. He nodded slowly. He understood the language I was speaking. It was the language of power. Offer letter arrived via email. I was sitting at the same kitchen table where the blueprint had been drawn. I opened the attachment. The salary figure was substantial. The title was exactly as I had written it in my plan years before, Vice President of Strategic Operations. I didn't jump for joy. I didn't call a friend. I simply leaned back in my chair and let out a long, slow breath. It was a quiet triumph. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. This wasn't happiness. It was the satisfaction of a complex equation finally being solved. I sent a brief, courteous reply accepting the position. Then I drafted my first all-staff email. It was a simple introduction, welcoming myself to the team, expressing excitement for the future of Ascendancy. I knew the exact moment he would see it, around 10 a.m. after his first coffee when he'd be scrolling through his inbox ignoring the corporate announcements. I imagined his finger stopping on the scroll wheel. I imagined his eyes, scanning the name, then the double take, the confusion, the disbelief, and finally, the dawning cold panic. That email was the first stone cast, the ripples were just beginning to spread. My first day, I dressed for a coronation, not a commencement, a sharp tailored suit that spoke of authority, not approachability. I walked through the doors of ascendancy, not as a newcomer, but as a queen returning to a kingdom that had been stolen. I made sure my schedule included a walk through his department mid-morning. I saw him before he saw me. He was at his desk, looking strained when he finally looked up. And our eyes met. It was everything I had imagined. The color drained from his face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. My own expression didn't flicker. I gave a slight impersonal nod, the kind you'd give to any stranger, and continued walking with my new executive assistant. I revealed nothing. The mask was perfect. The execution of the plan was a clinical process. It was all done through legitimate, justifiable business protocols. I started with a full audit of all ongoing projects in his division. I requested every report, every performance metric, every budget breakdown. For the past 2 years, I was looking for the cracks, the corners he had cut, the mediocrity he had allowed to fester, because he was complacent. And I found them. He was sloppy. He had coasted on his charm for too long. A project deadline breathed the illusion of our life together. The future id pictured, it just shattered into a million sharp, glittering pieces. Missed here, a budget overrun shrugged off there, a client satisfaction survey that was less than stellar. In our first one-on-one performance review, I was the picture of professional detachment. I sat behind my large glass desk. He sat across from me, sweating. I laid out the audit findings point by point. I didn't accuse. I simply presented the data, the declining metrics, the missed opportunities. I questioned his strategic choices, not with emotion, but with a cold, logical precision that was far more damaging. I watched him squirm, trying to defend himself with excuses that sounded pathetic and weak. Face of the printed charts and graphs in front of me, I was dismantling his reputation brick by brick, and I was using his own incompetence as the wrecking ball. The final scene is tonight. The office is quiet. Everyone has gone home. The only light comes from the lamp on my desk. In front of me is a thin, decisive folder. It contains the formal documentation for his termination. There's a section for cause supported by the months of evidence. I meticulously gathered his consistent failure to meet key performance indicators, the significant budget overruns on his flagship project, the formal complaint from a major client that he had mishandled. It's all there. In black and white, legally airtight, professionally justified. I pick up my pen. The weight of it feels familiar. It's the same weight I felt all those years ago, the weight of the plan first forming in my mind. I flip the folder open to the final page, the one that requires the VP's signature to enact the dismissal. I can see his name typed next to the word employee. For a moment, I don't see the paper. I see his face across the restaurant table, on our anniversary, the casual cruelty in his eyes. When he said he was leaving, I see the empty chair. I hear the silence. My hand is perfectly steady as I sign my name. The ink is dark and permanent. It's not a signature of anger, it's a signature of closure, a silent promise. Kept. I close the folder. The sound it makes is soft, but it echoes in the quiet room. It is the sound of an ending, his ending, and my new beginning. The morning of our anniversary, I woke up early. Planned the whole day. Even bought a new dress, this deep emerald green, because he always said it brought out my eyes. I was making coffee, humming, thinking about the reservations at that little Italian place. We loved the one with the checkered tablecloths. And the candlelight. I remember the sun was coming through the kitchen window, hitting the little specks of dust in the air, and everything felt golden, full of promise. He came into the kitchen, and he wasn't smiling. He was still in his pajamas, his hair all messy. He just leaned against the doorway and said my name, not good morning, not happy anniversary, just my name in this flat, tired voice. And I knew, I don't know how, but I knew right then that the entire day I had planned, the entire future I had pictured, was just gone. He said he wasn't happy. He said he hadn't been happy for a long time. He said he felt trapped. The words were like a script, like he'd rehearsed them. He said he'd already packed his things, that he'd found a new place, that it would be better this way, clean. And then he just left. He walked out the door with a single duffel bag. And I stood there in the kitchen, holding my mug of coffee that was going cold. The whole thing took maybe 10 minutes to unravel. 5 years.